Welcome to this panel, and thanks so much to Claire and Brona just for pulling together this day for all of us working in food systems and agriculture. Really amazing for us to be together, and also for pulling together this brilliant panel before you. So I'm Beth Bell. I'm Deputy Director of the Food Ethics Council, which is a charity which works UK-wide to nurture fair and resilient food systems by advocating for system change rather than behaviour change, challenging siloed solutions, and putting the well-being of people, planet and animals at the centre of food policy. And I'm also a co-founder of Carrick Greengrocers with my friend Lee, which is a community-owned greengrocers, which also has kind of lots to do and say around the supply chains we need for food systems and affordable food and accessible food. So we're here today to talk about the affordability or otherwise of food. The panel title is The Real Price of Cheap Food. And in the programme, you will have seen that the word cheap is in inverted commas. And that is because there is no such thing as cheap food. At some point in the supply chain from field to fork, somebody has to pay. There is no such thing as cheap food, and we have to stop talking about food as if there is. And as I said, in the Food Ethics Council, we work to find that balance point between people, planet, and animals, to find the solutions that create the best possible outcomes for all three. And I said the best possible, not the perfect one. There is no one perfect fix. There's only lots of interventions and solutions working at different parts of the system, which is why really I'm thrilled to be here with this panel, all working in different parts of the system because we need them all. So I'll do a quick introduction to each and then I'll hand over. So I'm joined by Mhairi Brown, Head of Food Futures at Food Farming and Countryside Commission. They are doing amazing work, notably in 2 reports this year, highlighting the enormous cost of cheap food, both in terms of human health and well-being and the dramatic effect on farmer incomes. Dr. Alice Gilmour, Food Systems Analyst, researcher with the Environmental Change Institute and the Co-Centre for Sustainable Food Systems, which is a research collaboration across NI, the Republic and GB. And Robb, co-founder of Carrick Greengrocers, which is running the Northern Ireland pilot of Bridging the Gap, which is a UK-wide programme by Sustain to test diverse approaches to tackling the gap between climate-friendly food and affordable food. And that's everything from me just now. So I'm going to hand over, first of all, to Mhairi, and yeah, take it away.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Beth. And hi, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here today, my first time in Northern Ireland. So in the UK, across all the nations, on average, we spend about 9% of our income on food. And how we got to this point is, just a kind of a really simplistic analysis of kind of the past 70 years. But post World War II, the aim was really to become much more self-sufficient in food. And government policy became really laser-focused on producing more and more food for less. So farms became much more productive due to various reasons, including, the introduction of fertilizers. And what happened ultimately is that, it created a sort of an agricultural treadmill, that farmers were always trying to produce more and more, but getting less in return. Efficiency became key, and we saw that the larger farms could produce more. We saw thousands of the kind of the smaller, the family-owned farms, close and be sold. And what that meant, we also saw many more mergers as well across things like fertilizers, seeds, equipment, production, and even retail. Just to really create those economies of scale. And alongside all of this, prosperity was increasing across the country. So people were able to spend more money on things like fridges and freezers, microwaves, things that just made things more convenient. And the food industry responded to that as well, producing things like ready meals, fast food started to appear, things that were already there and available for us to buy, and increasingly easy for us to access. Convenience became king. We also saw in the 80s and the 90s these kind of large multinational companies start to produce really highly processed foods, what are known as ultra-processed foods, that have been completely transformed away from the ingredients that they started out as. And they've been engineered to have a specific taste profile, usually quite high in things like fat and salt and sugar that aren't great for our health. They have a specific mouthfeel. They're designed to be very easy to eat, and they're largely devoid of things like fiber and nutrients that we actually need. With those kinds of products, they taste good, we buy more, companies invest more in them, they market them to us, we buy more, and that cycle continues. And these companies are at a point now where they have a huge amount of power in the food system. So they have a huge influence on what we are actually able to access in our local area, to afford. They have dominance over supply chains in many areas, but they also have really good access to policymakers. They're able to lobby against the kinds of policies that could start to make a bit of a difference to get us to a healthier food system. So again, quite a simplistic overview of the past 70 years, but I hope you'll bear with me with that. At FFCC, we're really concerned about what is the impact of these contexts, what happens when corporate power starts to take over in that way. So earlier this year, we released a report called Paying the Price, where we had a look at farming. We really wanted to understand what the impact this all was having on farmers. So that report found that in England, around 30% of farms are operating at a loss. Around 25%, so 1 in 4, are making less than £25,000 per year, so just above minimum wage. And on average, income per farmer is around 32,000. So really not a great picture. Obviously, I've just presented a very English picture to you, but in Northern Ireland, I'm sure people are aware of the volatility, the huge fluctuations in income. In James's session earlier, he asked the room who was happy with income from farming. Very few people put up their hands. And although the main kind of driving force behind that was to increase self-sufficiency in food, although that did increase initially to about 78%, that was back in 1984, it has since decreased. We're currently at about 60%. So we're really not achieving the aims that ultimately or proposedly is set out to achieve. Thinking beyond farmers to health, because these products don't have the best nutritional profile, what is the impact on health? And a report that we released last year was the false economy of big food, where one of our commissioners, Tim Jackson, who's an economist and a really wonderful writer, did an investigation of it for us, looking at just the health costs of this type of food in this food system that we're in, finding a cost of £268 billion every single year, and that's linked to unhealthy food. Again, that is a kind of a UK-wide figure. But thinking about Northern Ireland, the cost of treating something like obesity or type 2 diabetes is, a couple of billion per year at least. So although the food might appear cheap in supermarkets, the costs are ultimately being externalized to our health as individuals, to the healthcare system, to farmers, to the environment, and many more areas. I'll just finish this by saying that one of the key projects that FFCC have done over the past couple of years has been the food conversation, where we've been traveling around the UK to talk to people about this, about food systems, about what they really want from food. We hear many narratives around people that they just want cheap food, that they don't really care about the food system. They think that farmers do more harm than good is another key narrative, that they don't want government intervention. So we designed really robust public dialogues, so people from all different walks of life, different political leanings, different backgrounds, could come together to discuss these really fundamental issues. and found a huge amount of concern and anger and frustration and a real desire to act. And in Northern Ireland, some of the key concerns that were raised were a real concern for food security post-Brexit that appeared in many of the conversations, a real worry for farmers as people and morale and mental health, the long-term viability of farming, the need to address corporate power, and a real care and concern for local food systems, how to just get local food to local people. There's much more I could say about that, but I'll pause now.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mhairi. I'll hand over to Alice now.
Yeah, so I am Alice, working for the University of Oxford, but I work remotely, so I live near Belfast, and I was invited onto this panel to share the work that I've been doing as part of the Co-Centre for Sustainable Food Systems. So we've created a conceptual framework, which I'm going to show you on a slide. Oops, went back. So I'll talk you through the conceptual framework and then explain why it was created. So right in the centre of the framework is the food system core activities. So that's a box containing a linear food value chain from producing to consuming, or you could say farm to fork, or you could say soil to society, as that's what's referred to in DERA's food strategy framework. And then, see at the bottom it says supporting services and institutional framework. Framework. So that is includes energy, water, transport, communications, IT, data infrastructure, logistics and packaging, and also the civil service. And then all these things happening within the food system activities operate within a wider context of the environment, the social context, and also the economic context. So on the left there, those are driver words, and they don't operate independently of each other. Some of them would have more of an influence at certain times than other ones. And you could kind of think of them as all together, because some would be more powerful and others would be less powerful at certain stages. And then the outcome wording on the right-hand side, that maps back to the Co-Centre's vision statement. And then we've got a feedback arrow, and that kind of shows the interrelationships between the components, so the outcomes would become the drivers. So that is the framework. It was published in June this year, and there are lots of food system conceptual frameworks out there showing what the food system looks like in different locations, and they've been created for different purposes. However, there wasn't one for the Irish and the UK context which was suitable for what the Co-Centre needs. So the Co-Centre for Sustainable Food Systems is a 6-year programme, and they wanted this in the first year, just so that everyone has a joint understanding of what is included or outside of the food system, and also a joint language, so we're all using the same terminology, and just being clear on what everyone means when they say food system. So the framework helps us to deal with the complexity of the food system, because it's a systems thinking tool which enables us to talk about the drivers, outcomes and feedbacks. Because at the moment we know that the outcomes of the food system are suboptimal. So this conceptual framework allows us to see where there's potential intervention points or where changes could be made. So that is the conceptual framework. And then something else, this next one is still like a work in progress, and I think the text is a little bit small because it has to all be squished onto one slide. But this is just a draft version of what I am doing. So I forgot to say, but for the last slide, people across the Co-Centre programme were involved, and also food system stakeholders across Ireland and the UK, so people working in industry, policymakers, and also non-governmental organisations helped with the creation of that last one, and they've also helped with the creation of this sustainability compass. So this is just a draft version, because we're going to try finalising it in October when we're running another workshop with external food system stakeholders. So in the middle is like a circle with 4 quadrants, and that is the societal goals, and those 4 phrases match up to what was on the conceptual framework's outcomes, so like on the right-hand side of the last slide. So they're right in the middle, and they would be the societal goals, and then each societal goal has 4 areas of concern, and then there are food system issues which relate back to those areas of concern. So all these wording is still subject to change because some stakeholders in October might say they don't like a particular phrase or need to change things, but that's just how it's looking at the moment. So the purpose of this tool is to show unintended consequences of any innovations or technologies or interventions going into the food system. Or you could also say the term like trade-offs instead of unintended consequences. So although an intervention might look positive for some people, it's always going to have some negative implications somewhere, but you might forget about or not be able to see what it is. So this might help, or it should help, to bring to light what those hidden costs are. So for example, you could have a policy or a practical intervention that prioritises locally sourced foods. So that sounds good because it would reduce emissions from transporting food and also would support the local economy. But then there's also like negative things or unintended consequences because the prices are likely to be higher, and then certain products would not be available year-round. So actually, it might not benefit the end consumer. So the compass could be used for considering any hypothetical scenarios for the food system as a way to analyse and understand any hidden costs. So also I mentioned that this Food Co-Centre Sustainability Compass will have 4 rings, so the outermost ring, data, variables and metrics, is not on this slide because that's still a work in progress. At the moment, myself and a colleague are looking to collect data for Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland for each of these food system issues, and that will be published in a report in spring 2026. So yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Alice. And Mhairi?
Lovely, thank you. Thanks everybody for coming along today. And this is the worst possible time of the day for me to be talking to you. This is 3 o'clock slump, right? So bear with me. I was kind of talking about how to get my energy flowing a bit. But once I start talking about this, I can't stop. So you do tell me to shut up in 7 minutes specifically. So yeah, I'm one of the founders of Carrick Greengrocers. And certainly for me and Beth, not necessarily for all the directors because we're all there for slightly different reasons, we were very clear that we were intervening in the local food system and the local economy, and it was an intervention in our town centre. So we hadn't had a greengrocer in the town probably for about 15 years, and as a result of some sustainable food places work, we started asking people where they were buying the good quality local produce from, and all the answers were basically places outside Carrickfergus, which is a town of about 30,000 people, and you would think there would be at least one place to buy good quality local food. So the greengrocers emerged out of that, and we've been open for just over 2 years. It is very hard work for many of the reasons that we'll touch on today, but we're just digging away, and we're still here. That's what we say every day. We're still here. So I'm here specifically today to talk about Bridging the Gap, which is, I'm going to use my leaflet to make sure I get it exactly right. It is Bridging the Gap's run on 10 pilots across the UK, demonstrating effective financial and policy mechanisms that can enable people on lower incomes to access climate and nature-friendly food. And that's because all the participants in Bridging the Gap believe everyone should be able to access food that is good for their health and for the planet. And it's a programme led by Sustain, Growing Communities, Alexandra Rose Charity, with nation partners, Food Sense Wales, Nourish Scotland and Nourish NI were also part of that. So we were delighted to be part of that programme. There were initially 2 pilots in Northern Ireland, so we were working alongside Barry in Newtonards on his Veg Box scheme as well. So the pilots are taking place in London, 2 pilots in Wales, and a couple of pilots in Scotland, and then Liverpool as well. And they're focusing on horticulture, local retail, fair wages, procurement, vouchers and prescriptions, and supply chains. And our specific pilot is called the Friendly Food Club, And for members of our Friendly Food Club who can join extremely easily, we don't do any checking of anybody's income or anything like that. Basically, people are self-selecting. If they find that they are not buying organic produce because it feels too expensive for them, then they are very welcome to join us. And we offer a 50% discount on climate and nature-friendly food that we sell in the shop, which is mostly from Chris Dobbs, Chris's Market Garden, which is just outside Carrick Fergus. And Chris has been a key part of the development of the Greengrocers since before we opened. We have a really close relationship with him. It's probably maybe 1.5 miles, 2 miles away from us, and Chris grows a significant variety of vegetables. And then we also have a tomato supplier this time of the year, and he doesn't use any pesticides or anything, so we're able to include him. So there are other really small-scale producers that occasionally give us some produce that we include in our Friendly Food Club. I currently project manage the Friendly Food Club. Working closely with Hannah from Sustain. It launched in July 2024, so we'd been open for a year, so still very much finding our feet. And we currently have over 90 members. Our goal was 60. So that's been great to kind of exceed that, although we kind of plucked 60 out of the air. We really had no idea what it was going to look like. And we're feeding around 200 people. So there are those individual members, but then there are their family members at home. And so far, it's been worth over £1,000 in sales to us in the year. And that's significant considering the average spend in our shop is £7.46p. So that's a lot of £7. I recently did a monitoring report for Bridging the Gap, so I've got some what I think are interesting facts and figures that I thought I would share with you. So we've sold 42 different types of vegetables. That equates to almost 50 kilograms plus around 200 bags and bunches. So that's quite a lot of veg. Carrots and Chris's salad bags have been the most popular thing. And over the year, we've sold around 400 bags of salad. The salad bags are really excellent. They will last for up to 2 weeks in your fridge. And so that people really notice the difference from, salad bags that they would be buying in the supermarket. So while on the face of it, they might look more expensive, for example, so we sell them. They're £2.25, although with the Friendly Food Club, they're £1.13. And then that experience, taking them home and having something that tastes really good and lasts, so on the face of it, cheap, but actually much better value. We did a baseline survey that is the same right across the Bridging the Gap pilots, and people's priorities were cost, nutrition, and it being locally sourced. That was about 70%, and 42% of the people who filled in the survey also said that one of their priorities was eating food that was pesticide-free. I have hay fever and I've got this really annoying tickly cough, so it's hopefully it's not annoying you as much as it's annoying me. Cost was not necessarily the main reason for buying, not their primary concern. Now, of course, we're kind of self-selecting the people who have chosen to come into the Greengrocers have maybe, they have already decided that cost is not the main thing for them. Interestingly, when we first opened, the BBC came down and interviewed people on the first day, and they spoke to 3 different people from 3 different demographics who weren't necessarily our members either, because we're a co-op and we're owned by our members. And they all said it wasn't just about cost, it was about good quality food, particularly if they're thinking about families, and about buying food that was locally sourced. Those things were really important to them. Which was really interesting because it wasn't a story that was being told in the midst of a cost of living crisis, when really the only conversation around food was how much it cost and that people wanted cheap food. Almost 50% of the people who've been surveyed who are members of the Friendly Food Club, or who filled in the surveys, the baseline surveys, were worried about food running out before they got more money to buy more. We've also then started, the pilot is due to come to an end later on this year, and we've started collecting information through endline surveys, which again will be done right across all the pilots. And the things that people are saying that, the benefits that they have experienced from being part of the Friendly Food Club are that people have more choice over what they eat, which, with those 42 different types of veg being on offer at a much more accessible price, that really makes sense, that they feel like they're getting a better quality diet. Interestingly, more people than I would have anticipated said that they felt like they were reducing their impact on climate change. And in a place like Carrick, which is seen as extremely conservative, and where you might assume there are lots of people who are caught up in some kind of climate change denialism, that was really great to see that. People said that they felt like they were doing something good for their health and that they felt more connected to their community. So lots of really important well-being benefits there as well. When we're thinking about the cost to health from cheap food, and I think not just physical health, mental health as well, right? That's that we're thinking about that too. So sustain or developing policy asks at the minute. And the plan is to produce a report, policy briefings later on this year, and that will start with an event in Westminster, and all the pilots will be participating in that. So if you're interested, keep an eye out for that report coming out, and them pulling the results from all the pilots together to hopefully influence policymakers to start thinking about changes that can be made. Overall, we're thinking longer term about the Friendly Food Club, and I think one of the options for us and actually some of the other pilots is to introduce some kind of pay it forward scheme. So we might, for example, ask our members to contribute to a pot, and we think it's probably around £500. Where we would then have access to this pot, which would allow us to keep the Friendly Food Club going. And it kind of makes a real difference. It allows us also to start to have a conversation with people about where their food's coming from, about cost, and it makes them more ready to maybe take some risks with food that they're not necessarily familiar with. So that has... and also, it allows us to buy more produce from Chris, and it has supported us the first couple of years of operation. We are operating in really challenging conditions. We knew what we were getting into, but it's still hard. So actually, that bit of extra support from the Friendly Food Club has made a difference to us as a shop over the last year as well.
Lovely, thank you. That's amazing. There's so much in that. I think I spend a lot of time talking about how we want, certainly in the work that I do and that Lee does, around let's try and create the focus within policy discussions on system change and not behaviour change, because the behaviour will change when the systems that people live their lives in are different. If you're asking people to make behaviour change in systems that are broken or compromised, it's never going to work, and it's going to make people feel even worse about themselves. So I suppose with that in mind, I would like to, don't need to wait for me to bring you in, jump in. So thinking about the systemic barriers and blockers that are impeding change, both for farmers and citizens. Is there anything in particular that you feel like is worth getting into today? Please.
Maybe take that. So in speaking to the citizens involved in the food conversation, so we had more than 300 involved across the UK, including from Northern Ireland. The key concern across all areas that we went to with that project was the imbalance of power in the food system, the lack of fairness, and the concentration of power that's held by food companies. It wasn't said in a way that was meant to be anti-industry in any way, but just a real recognition that it feels as though, people said to us, it feels as though the the odds are stacked against us. We're just trying to feed our families healthy food and just really struggling to find it. And just feeling that these foods, particularly for the next generation, are just really normalized with the extent of advertising and marketing behind these types of products, where they're placed in supermarkets, the fact that you go to so many supermarkets and see the same products over and over again, and that being the only option in so many areas. You know, not every area is as lucky as Carrick Fergus to have somewhere that does offer, you know, genuinely local food to local people. So one of the kind of the key asks, I guess, from citizens that came out of the food conversation was the types of regulation that would create kind of a level playing field, that would put standards in place to make sure that all companies act in the same way. And that's things, you know, reducing the level of unhealthy food that's advertised and instead showing us more of the good things. It's about making sure that unhealthy food isn't served in schools, and instead that there's a really good range of tasty options for children instead. They're really quite, I guess logical in a way, but they're the types of policies that keep getting fought back, because they do ultimately mean that industry will need to change the way that they act. But this is what citizens really want, and it's not always something that policymakers are hearing.
Brilliant, thank you. Anything else on like systemic blockers for change that you want to highlight?
I suppose, like, one of the issues for me, and it was really great to see Alice offering some tools there to think more systemically, really, you know, because I think we talk about systems change a lot, but we're maybe not very specific about what that actually means and how to do it. And so what I don't see is systems change practitioners being platformed or being invited into those kind of policy influencing conversations, or even in academia, and a clear kind of theory of change being created in some of those places as well. And it's not just about systems thinking, it's also about systems. Like, for me, it's really about systems being. How we are in systems, how we relate to each other is really, really important. And it's that being, action, practice that to move away from thinking in really linear terms is really important. And also, like, certainly, I think in Northern Ireland, a lack of ambition is a real systemic barrier. And then also we're thinking about systems change, thinking about narratives that dominate and how to challenge them. And I think, you know, it's really great to see these the reports from Food and Farming Commission, because I think we need to work at how we talk about cheap food and how we challenge some of those narratives at all levels. So a couple of months ago, someone was walking past the shop and they were looking in the window, the first time that they had walked past and thinking about coming in. And a woman who I, from my point of view, is like a very typical Carrick person, said, "I wouldn't bother looking in there, love. You'll need a second mortgage to buy anything." So, our peaches are 90p. You don't need a second mortgage for that. But, you know, and I have really spent a lot of time thinking about useful ways of challenging that kind of thinking. And how do I get into a conversation with somebody whose perception of our shop is that you need a second mortgage to buy anything. So I think as a system, people working together, we need to come up with better ways of talking about cheap food, and this is a really great start for me. And that kind of, like, you know, we can't keep doing the same thing, despite our experience. And certainly for us, you know, and there's a challenge around infrastructure, I think, as well, for like operating on the scale we're operating on.
Yeah, very much so. I was thinking, Alice, just in terms of the framework and some of these things that Mhairi has touched on around kind of industry, is there kind of, have you got any insights on like how that tool can be deployed to shift the systems?
So DERA are aware of the tool and they're keen to learn more, so that it could be in a future report. But I'm not so sure about how industry Because I was interviewing people in industry and like showing them earlier stages of the conceptual framework, and they all thought it would be quite good. Because sometimes they've got to set their scene when they're just like launching something or like early on. So I think it could be handy. But I think something that is impeding or like blocking change for the citizens and farmers is that policymakers don't really understand the food system, because they're quite often working in a silo. So they know what's happening around them or like in their particular department, but then they don't really have an understanding of the entire food system. So that's where a tool such as the Food Co-Centre conceptual framework could help. And then also there's a problem if people can't understand the costs, and that would often hit the most vulnerable people in society the hardest. So it's quite hard to understand who's paying the cost for cheap food. So then, also at the moment, there's currently no national or local negotiation process for monitoring hidden costs. So maybe that needs to be something that becomes more at the forefront.
Absolutely, thank you. I want to leave it just a little bit of time for Q&A, but before I do that, I just want to ask, I suppose, like a more a positive question in terms of what gives you hope that change is possible, and kind of any glimmers that you'd like to highlight. Go for it.
I do genuinely feel quite positive at the moment about the potential for change. I think being able to just talk to people in a very open and genuine way has been a real game changer. For most of my career, I've worked very much in kind of policy and campaigning, but not being able to just reach people who are impacted by policies or a lack of policies. So being able to do the citizen work has been really positive in that way. We've also recently seen as kind of as an outcome of this work is that DEFRA at Westminster have now set up a citizen advisory council to their new food strategy, which feels like a real landmark moment to really have citizens' voices involved in the process too, alongside all the other typical stakeholders. It's not going to cure everything within the food system, but it's just that first step to trying things differently, to try to find a way forward. And hopefully we'll be able to take that success to other nations in the UK as well.
Oh, I was also going to mention that DEFRA's got systems units now, but I think what's giving me hope is that during the COVID-19 pandemic, people realised that we can't always rely on like fully stocked shelves and a supply chain working 24/7. There needs to be more resilience in case the supply chain is disrupted. And then historically, I think there's been more of a focus on economic and agricultural output. But then the United Nations Food Systems Summit in 2021 kind of changed sort of how people were talking about it, and now it's become more at the forefront. And also DERA's food strategy framework recognises the interconnectedness of the food system, so it's not focusing just on economic growth nowadays, but also looking at across other outcomes such as health, environment and also social. And then the Irish government in their Food Vision 2030 report, they stated that they're striving to be a leader in sustainable food systems. So I think that's all a sign of just change, people looking at the system.
I think very specifically had a great conversation with a customer in the shop yesterday who talked about how his food buying habits have completely changed since we opened the Greengrocer. He was very similar to everybody else and regularly shopping in the supermarket, and now he comes into our shop every week. That has been a real game changer for us, that, having a shop, we're not inviting people to focus groups or surveying them. We're having conversations with people who have walked through the door, and that has just been, there is so much rich data from conversations on the shop floor, and how many people want things to change. And I know this is really positive, but just kind of going back to, people feel really trapped in this system with the supermarkets. And that I get such a strong sense since we opened of how people have, this world has been designed around them that they never consented to, and they don't know how to get out of it. And so like certainly for us in the conversations we're having, we have provided a solution to that for them, and that has made people feel really good. So more, please.
Thank you. And I'll take a wee second for a cherished privilege and give a glimmer for me, which is that within the food strategy framework and within the action plan, the right to food is very prominently as the first principle. And I think that's a really important signal from Minister Muir and from his colleagues in DERA, that kind of rights-based language should be front and centre, and that the right to food is seen as a fundamental human right. Yes, it's tricky of how we operationalise it, but there's the will is there, and we've just got to figure out how to do it. And I know lots of people, and ourselves included, are doing that. So thank you all very much. Does anyone have any questions? Great. Let's just find a mic for you. Just here. Here. Jill, sorry, here in the middle. Here. Yeah.
Not do the fun question time describing people.
Yeah, yes. Lady in the pink coat.
Thank you. That was a really interesting session. I was at a conference in April, and there was a lady, Lisa Cook, that had, I don't know if you're familiar with her or not, but she had done research in the profitability throughout the entire food chain, right up looking at supermarkets, all of that middle sector with manufacturing, distribution, and then farming. And the only sector really that was profitable in that whole life cycle, I know we put a lot of blame on supermarkets, but actually it was that whole middle manufacturing and so on that actually was profitable. And I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on, do you think part of the solution is actually removing that and having a lot more direct sales to consumer? But in order to go for that to happen, there's a lot of consumer change required, which will be inevitably unpopular. People want to have all the, they've got accustomed to being able to go and having stock shelves, eating whatever cuisine they want. And I think that might be where there's a reluctance to make any policy changes because it's an unpopular opinion. So it's a bit of a, how do you think what comes first, the behaviour change rather than the policy, and how do you tackle that?
I haven't looked, but I'm going to imagine Lee would like to come in there. No, you okay?
It's kind of like it's slightly, obviously, like we're there's, like we have really short supply chains. We have obviously, the producer is selling straight to us and we're selling straight to the consumer. And, there, as far as we're concerned, there's lots and lots of benefits there, local accountability. And as we kind of watch democracy crumble around us, that's real, as far as I'm concerned, a key part of democracy, and people being able to look their suppliers in the eye and meet them and because I was having a conversation with somebody the other day about produce that's labelled organic in the supermarket, and it's not the first time I've heard this in the greengrocer around people being concerned that is not authentic. That has kind of surprised me, but they are very suspicious of that produce as well, and that there are loopholes apparently that so like that trust is being eaten away all over the place, and stuff that builds trust, which in my experience is shorter supply chains. But I don't know enough about manufacturing and that to really to comment on that. But it seems to me, and we're not talking about kind of removing all of that from the system either. But what we need is definitely more smaller scale solutions and more of them that supports those small, short supply chains. And the Market Garden Renaissance that Land Workers Alliance are proposing, and then places to sell that produce. We definitely need more of that.
Yeah, I fully agree with Lee. I think the way forward, or the kind of the version of the future that we're getting to, ultimately has to move away from that kind of globalized supply chain to something that is much more diverse, with shorter supply chains, that keeps more wealth in communities. And I would say that if, this phrase has already been said today, but if you build it, they will come. You know, and I think that starts with really bold leadership. We really need the government to stand up and say, this is what we're working towards. There are kind of glimmers of that. You know, just this week, they've banned the sale of energy drinks to, you know, children under the age of 16 years. And in talking about that, you know, Keir Starmer was saying, I don't care if you call me nanny state. I'm doing this because it's right. And that's the kind of statement we need to see. You know, this is what we need to get to, and this is what's needed. And then the policies from that can follow. And we'll see, you know, I guess a culture change with that as well.
Thank you. Any other questions at the back here? Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you all for such a great and interesting conversation. I've got a curiosity which I keep thinking about at the moment, and I'm wondering if any of you have a perspective on thinking about these shorter supply chains and, you know, food security and diversity and local resilient food systems. Why is this not higher up both the governmental agenda and the public consciousness here with our history of the Great Hunger and the famine? It perplexes me. I think it's interesting. Or strange, actually. We should, I feel, on the island of Ireland, know more about this, the negative consequences of this, than many other places in the, you know, certainly Western Europe anyway, right?
Thank you. Do you want to, so it's really interesting. Lee and I were talking with Maria from a panel earlier about the Great Hunger about an hour and a half ago, and how difficult it is to talk about, but how necessary it is. But it's tricky, right?
Yeah, I think, you know, if we're talking about systems change, then we really need to interrogate systemic patterns that we need to actively change, and therefore we really need to understand where those really came from. And I was thinking about it in the context of how much food is exported out of Ireland, and that practice, obviously, that caused the Great Hunger, and doesn't bubble up in conversation. You know, like, you know, don't say anything. Say, you know, is like don't be saying anything. We say that quite a lot here in Northern Ireland. So, you know, like we really have a strong systemic practice of not saying the stuff that needs to be said, and it feeling really uncomfortable and potentially scary to say stuff as well. You know, so that's all bubbling under here as well, you know, and those cultural issues. And that's, I suppose, what I was talking about a bit in terms of the systems change practitioners and how we like interrogate some of that stuff too, in order to really create that broader change that we need. Like to some extent, we're kind of tinkering around the edges until we really get into that deep shit. I don't have the answer to that, but, you know, I think thank you for raising it, and you know, like at least that seed has been planted a bit in this room today. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, I just think it's important to speak it into the room, actually, because I went to a primarily Protestant school. I grew up here in the 70s. I learned zero Irish history, I think. It was all British and European. So certainly from my perspective, I'm having to really educate myself. I can't even say re-educate myself, because I never heard this stuff. I didn't even know that it was An Gcóir Mór, the Great Hunger. I didn't even know that until last week, right? And so I think it's important to start naming it, because it is, you know, it is part of what we're all dealing with in terms of, I think, both the remembering and the forgetting, right? Like, it's in there. And as you're pointing out, you're making me think like it's in there so systemically, right? In terms of like what's gone on historically and where we are now, right?
Yeah.
And also, you know, like I was at Feeding Ourselves earlier on this year in Clockmills, and they did a really interesting process on the Sunday where they bring in like local farmers to try and have a more systemic conversation with more actors and not just all of the same people, I suppose. And there, you know, like there is a real sense of pride at how Ireland feeds the world as well, you know. So, where does that come from? And but that is very real for people too, you know. So, yeah, it's really messy and complex, but those things need to come through too, for sure.
Brilliant. Thank you all so much. Thank you for the questions. We're very short of time, but I would like each of you, if there is just one thing you would like to leave the room with. I know Lee hates it when I say just one thing, but just one thing of many. If they're just, yeah.
That leaving the room with?
Yeah. And it, yeah.
Yes.
Mhairi.
Somebody else go first.
Sure. I would say, I'd just like to reiterate Beth's opener that there really is no such thing as cheap food. And quite often this food system gets called broken. But in many ways it's operating exactly the way it's intended to benefit the people that it's intended to. And so that's always the question to keep in mind. Who is benefiting, who is profiting, and what action do we need to take?
My key takeaway is that a systems approach would be or is needed. So people currently working in silos across the government or in different areas or departments, they need to understand the complexity of the food system and we need to agree on what the problem is and then agree on possible solutions.
I have made some notes from the reports that we were talking about, and that one of their recommendations was about resourcing the good stuff that's happening. So I just want to really, because it's really, really hard trying to intervene in these systems and and innovate and demonstrate a different way of doing things. And we can only grow that if it's resourced.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.